we're probably not doing this show right now if it's not for Robert Redford, because I don't think I ever would have pursued the film industry as an independent the way that I have. I may have just tried to beat the streets as an actor or make something here or there in my spare time. But after really kind of studying his life and seeing what he did, that really made me think I wanted to be in all facets of this. In this day and age, it's more of a media making process. In our case, we use podcasts and then take subjects out of that, use the podcasting form as a research piece, and then turn it into a movie.
This episode of Lone Star Lore is a little different. Usually I'm the one asking the questions. I sit across from a historian, writer, scholar, or expert and try to follow the thread of a Texas story wherever it leads. But this time, Joleene has turned the questions to me. She came to this episode through a piece she had written about Robert Redford's family ties to San Marcos and Austin. As we started talking, it became clear this was not simply a story about a famous actor with a Texas connection. It was a story about influence. Robert Redford is usually remembered as a Hollywood icon, the founder of Sundance, and one of the defining faces of the American West. But for me, he was something even more personal. He was the single most important artistic model I had for imagining a life as an independent media creator. Not just an actor, not just a director, but someone who built a creative life across film, story, place, nature, and independence. In this special edition of Lone Star Lore, we're exploring a slightly different kind of Texas history. Not a battle, not a town, not a political fight. Instead, we're asking how Texas may have helped shape one of the artists who helped shape American culture.
From prairie winds to courthouse doors, these tales run deep to the Texas core. With Texas tales, there's always more. So come chase the past with Lone Star Lore.
Jordan Buckley kept sending me emails about working on a story on the Redford family in San Marcos. And I thought, the Redford family, I don't really think about I don't care about the Redford family. And so I sent him a message back. I didn't think I was much interested in that. And a week or so later, I got another email. I'd really like for you to take a look at this Redford story. And it was shortly after that that I realized Robert Redford had passed away. And I thought, the Redford family is Robert Redford's family? That's who this is? Well, hell yes, I want to do this. On September 16, 2025, the actor Robert Redford died at his home in the mountains of Utah, his home away from Hollywood for much of his life. By the end of his life, he had amassed a career as an actor, a director, a philanthropist, an environmentalist, and a social critic. As the creator of the Sundance Film Festival, he promoted and nurtured new filmmakers to the extent he was virtually the godfather of independent filmmaking. But did you know he had ties to Texas, San Marcos, and Austin especially? His mother, Martha Hart Redford, the daughter of Archibald Tot Hart and Sally Pate Green, was born in Austin in 1915. The marriage of Tot and Sally was the unlikeliest of marriages. They had absolutely nothing in common other than ambition. Sally Pate was orphaned as a baby and raised in San Marcos in the household of her affluent grandfather, Edwin Jeremiah Littleberry Green. Ed Green rechristened Sally as Mattie in honor of her mother. So Redford's grandmother shows up in census records as Sally Pate and Mattie Pate. It was Sally/Mattie's social and economic position that gave Tot Hart his start. Tot could build anything he set his mind to, but what he wanted to build was houses in Austin, Texas. His marriage allowed him to do that in partnership with Sally Green's father, Ed Green. Tot built some of the first houses in the new Travis Heights subdivision Ed was developing. With Ed's death and the Depression, Tot was unable to sell the houses, but he did build one on Scenic Drive that became his own. That was the house that Redford inherited in 1959 and sold in 1965. It still stands today. After Martha's birth, the marriage between Sally and Tot started to crumble. Tot began finding comfort in the company of other women, especially his wealthy neighbor, while Sally found her comfort in a bottle. Just as Sally's addiction threatened to take her life, as a last resort, a Christian Scientist doctor who lived close by was called. Sally converted, stopped drinking, and divorced Tot. With her newfound faith and her daughter in tow, Sally took what she got from the divorce settlement and set out for the promised land of Los Angeles, California. Robert does not appear to have maintained any relationship with Sally, but he did, however, continue his relationship with his grandfather, Tot, when he visited in the summers. Redford recalled Tot as gruff, but loving and full of spit and vinegar. He married the rich neighbor he had been seeing before his divorce. In later years, Tot fell off of the roof of his house and was crippled thereafter. It hurt Redford to see the older man hobbling around. But in his youth, Tot must have been a piece of work. He took Bobby to Barton Springs and tossed him in the pool, the old-fashioned sink-or-swim method of teaching a child how to swim. By all accounts, some from Redford himself, he loved that irascible old curmudgeon.
Tot Hart was not a polished mentor. He was not a formal teacher, but he was a builder. He knew how to make things with his hands, how to work with land, materials, and structure. And for a boy like Robert Redford, those lessons may not have come as lectures. They may have come through proximity, watching, visiting, absorbing. Because later in Redford's life, long after the summers in Texas, that same instinct to build shows up again, not just metaphorically, but literally.
But Redford did gain a love and affection for the local swimming site, where even today kids still learn to swim. It was his money, fame, and importance that saved Barton Springs from commercial and residential development in the early 1990s. His supports for the grassroots campaign to save the beloved waterhole resulted in the Save Our Springs City Ordinance in 1992. That was only a small portion of his national environmental work over the years, but a vital portion to Texas. Tot must have conveyed some of his knowledge of building things, especially houses, to his grandson Bobby, because Redford, the adult actor, built his first house on 2 acres at the Sundance homestead. Redford hired a local contractor and his son to help him. Along with input from a local architect, the 3 men built the sprawling 6 A-frames home themselves, using as much as possible local materials from the natural environment. Pictures of the exterior of the house show an innovative conglomerate of tall peaks and valleys formed by the joining of the 6 A-frames. The inside is rustic with large wooden beams and a massive ceiling-to-floor stone fireplace Redford designed and built himself. The house is creative and obviously required some extensive knowledge of building. Just looking at the photographs, it is easy to see where Redford's artistic training and talent were joined to what he learned as a kid about building houses from his grandfather.
My dad was a builder. My mom was a teacher, so I learned to read and write pretty young because of her. And I was always watching movies. She was really strict on me about most things, but she didn't restrict what I watched, really. So I was watching, at that time, in the early 80s, so I was watching Rocky, Rambo, all the Arnold Schwarzenegger stuff, which I still love. But I think at the time, you know, my parents, they were watching Jeremiah Johnson, rewatching Butch and Sundance. And so I wasn't turned on right away, but whenever I finally was kind of forced to sit down and watch that, it made an impression because it made it, a lot of times I was too young to understand what was really going on, but the presence of Robert Redford and Newman, for that matter, showed up, and it made me want to rewatch those movies. But as I got older, I realized these movies have something to say. And I don't think certainly not from a directorial standpoint. Anything he directed was, man, there was layers, and the well runs really deep with the stuff that he was pulling out, and you can still see it now.
All the President's Men was one of my favorites. And then I saw 3 Days of the Condor. I just happened to, was looking for a movie to watch while I was quilting, and that popped up. And I really enjoyed that. So watch that again.
Yeah.
And then they're going to do a screening of the Great Waldo Pepper out in Lockhart. sometime this coming fall. So anyway, that's what pulled me into the Redford piece. It was when I found out that's who it was. I'd been passing it up for a month or so.
You knew he had the connection to Texas already?
No.
Oh, okay.
I did not.
Oh, so maybe tell us that too.
Well, that was why the publisher of the Examiner wanted me to take a look at it, was to tie in him, Redford, to San Marcos primarily. But I didn't know he had a Texas connection, and I surely didn't know he had a connection to Travis Heights. I looked at a house to buy in Travis Heights after Paul and I first married. Didn't buy it, couldn't afford it, but wish we had. But I didn't know all this. So when I did the research, this stuff kept popping up, and I kept reading, and more popped up, and I got rather fascinated with Redford. I think I thought he was sort of a lightweight in the movie business. And when I got into reading about him, I realized what an intelligent, complex man he was. And that rather fascinated me. Quite frankly, the man was a nerd, and I am too. And so there was a meeting of the minds there of books and ideas and concepts and expanding the thought in the movie and the project of a movie out to a broader human concept of what makes people go.
There's a revealing irony here. When Joleene first started looking into Redford, she admitted she had thought of him as something of a lightweight in the film business. Not untalented, not unimportant, but maybe easier to underestimate than he should have been. And in a strange way, that means she was seeing him the way Hollywood first tried to see him. In the early 1960s, Redford was easy to misread. Blonde hair, blue eyes, California good looks, the kind of face studios thought they could find at any casting call. But that was the trap, because beneath the image was a serious artist, a restless thinker, and eventually one of the most important independent forces in American film.
You know, he had done Inside Daisy Clover. He had done This Property is Condemned with Natalie Wood, and then he did, I think Barefoot in the Park was either right before or right in the mix of all of that. Those were more romantic draws, and he was playing right into what he looks like. When he got Butch and Sundance, that was a turning of major tides, because it not only turned him into a megastar, but it also gave him the power, not just of money, but the ability to say, you know what, I can step away from all this anytime if I wanted to. And I think that's what Utah was for him. And I think that a big turning point came there. But as a result of all of that, the empowerment of being able to create his own, whether it's Sundance, the festival, or which came a little later, or the ability to make a movie like Downhill Racer or The Great Waldo Pepper, those were personal projects for him. And in fact, he probably always had the depth. He just was characterized as this blonde-headed, blue-eyed, handsome leading man or whatever.
To understand Redford's depth and complexity as a man, you have to look past the screen image and back into his childhood and family history, part of which was deeply tied to Central Texas. San Marcos, Austin, Travis Heights, Barton Springs, and the people whose lives formed the world his mother came from.
Redford's mother, Martha, married Charles Redford in California and had Bobby in 1937. Martha Hart Redford was raised in her mother's Christian Science faith, a fact that may have contributed to her death of a rare blood disease in 1955. Her faith prohibited the necessary blood transfusions she needed to survive. Her death was one of the seminal events of Bobby's life. He was attached to his mother much more than his father, and her death left him rudderless and unable to concentrate for several years before he recovered from her loss and was able to move forward with his artistic career. His first passion and advanced schooling was in art, not acting. He studied in Europe and the Pratt Institute in America, but shifted to acting and attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City, working in both stage and television before breaking through into film. Well, it seemed like he made some connection with his artistic career being the manifestation of the action being the acting career, that he sort of blended the two together. Both were art forms for him.
Yeah, I think he sums it up. I heard him talking about the movie A River Runs Through It at one point, and he said that exactly what you just said, is that he took everything in the arts as one thing, and he really looked at it as if you go far enough with something, it's all going to merge into one great river. He looked at filmmaking as sculpture in a lot of ways, because you're taking and whittling and piecing and just reforming this thing. And I think he carried that on and was an inspiration to so many others to see that art, you have your different mediums of art, whether you're a painter, oils, or pastels, or a sculptor, but it's all coming from the same place, and it all has to come from inside the person and flow out in a way that's relatable. And that's, I think, what he liked about movies, is that he could take something that only meant something important to him, and he could find a way to make it important to other people. As an example, the Watergate issue, that was on everybody's mind, it seemed like, and people were, fascinated by it. But it was one of those things, how do we take these big themes, things that we know people in our society currently care about, and build them into a story format and put the story out there, not necessarily provide an answer, but to make sure the question is posed in a powerful enough way that people sit up and pay attention. And we still watch those, The
universality of the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
He was fascinated with, it seems. Long before his acting career, he summered in Texas. Redford's Texas connections were twofold in San Marcos. Great-grandfather was Edwin J.L. Green, who was born in Arkansas in 1843, where his father, George Green, was endeavoring to start a printing business. When it failed, George picked up his family and hightailed it to Texas sometime after 1850. Ed served in the Confederate military in 1864, but saw little action. After the Civil War, Green became a prominent businessman in San Marcos, owned the largest bank in the area, ran a thriving mercantile business, started the first electric plant, which Green sold to the city of San Marcos, was involved in developing the local water system, and served in several city and county offices. His 30 years as a member of the school board is bound to be a record. His civic mindedness extended to his membership in the Ku Klux Klan. Another of Redford's relatives was Zachariah, or Zach Bugg, who came from Tennessee to Texas with his brother after 1850 and before 1860. Zach Bugg was a sheriff of Hays County, but not the first sheriff, as was so often claimed in the Redford biographies. Zach Bugg was listed as sheriff in the 1860 census, but not the 1870 census, where he is listed as a farmer. However, by 1873, he returned to the position of sheriff. His bond and oath of office are recorded in the Texas State Library and Archives. Redford told his biographer, Michael Callan, that he had been made to understand that his ancestors were all just a bunch of, quote, horse stealers, dope addicts, and dropouts, unquote. While some of his ancestors had their challenges, they don't seem to have been any worse or any better than most folks. They held jobs that supported their families for the most part, were decent parents, some better than others, and contributed to the welfare of the nation by being responsible citizens. Redford himself was a highly intelligent man, and that brain power had to have come from somewhere. He was gifted as an artist and an actor, and had ancestors who excelled in music and art. His paternal grandfather was a violin virtuoso at 12, but never received formal musical training. Nicknamed Tiger, he may have been the relative Redford was thinking about when he called some of his relatives dropouts. Tiger had the reddish blonde hair that Redford inherited. Redford reconnected with Tiger as an adult, and they grew close in Tiger's later years. There is no accounting for how the roll of the genetic dice are going to shake out. It is conceivable that Robert Redford was the accumulation of the gifts of several ancestors, and biology combined to roll all that talent into him.
Family history can only tell us so much. It does not explain a person completely, but it does leave clues. In Redford's case, those clues are scattered across central Texas and the lives of people who were ambitious, flawed, civic-minded, artistic, contradictory, and very human. So the question is not whether Texas made Robert Redford who he was. The better question is what version of Texas he absorbed, and how that version of the West later showed up in the stories he told.
Certainly, Redford was impacted in his youth by his time in Texas. He was a creature of the West as an adult, but the West he saw in Texas was not the West of California, Utah, or Colorado. Texas was the mythology of the West personified. It was the land of the cowboys, six-shooters, Texas Rangers, Indians, and the Alamo. During breaks and barefoot in the park, Redford would shed his coat and tie and don his Stetson and cowboy boots. That's the impact of Texas talking there, for sure. Well, he's playing an anti-hero in Sundance and in Waldo Pepper. Jeremiah Johnson.
Jeremiah Johnson.
He definitely is.
Another escaped the war. He left the Mexican-American War and went to the mountains in Jeremiah. And you talk about nuance. They've shot, they could easily, in this day and age, they probably would cut a lot of the things that, of course, he wouldn't allow to be cut at that time and would probably still not allow to be cut. But it builds out this whole, you get a real sense of, oh, it's romantic idea to leave the big city and go out to the wild unknown. It's a romantic idea, but when you get there, now what?
Yeah,
And now you get to see the now what.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's part of the American image is the independent, lone person that needs nobody else. The pioneer out there is part of the American image. When you get right down to reality, the American story is the story of community, of people who work together, who help each other. They do the barn raising. They build a school together and have the big party afterwards. And it is more the story of community than it is those independent people. I've always told my students that you find that independent hermit type and I will show you a very pathologically damaged individual.
That is the tension inside so many Western stories. The myth celebrates the lone figure, the man who needs no one, the person who disappears into the landscape and becomes complete. But the reality is harder and more complicated. And for Redford, Texas may have offered both versions at once. The mythology of cowboys, rangers, and open space, but also the physical experience of rivers, heat, swimming holes, and land. The West was not just an image. It was a place he could feel.
Another thing Redford gained from his Texas experience was a love for nature. Los Angeles was fast becoming, well, L.A. One can envision Redford with that shock of sandy hair and the coming grace of a teenager that made him a good athlete, romping in the San Marcos River or perfecting his swimming stroke in Barton Springs. His lifelong love for nature, which spawned the environmentalist giant that he was, likely started here in Texas.
Stories make a big difference. And he was already in the world of storytelling. That was his profession. So he figured he could take the two and blend them and be able to produce work that mattered not only for the time. I don't know if he was thinking about it mattering 50 years on, but he definitely felt like it would matter at the time. And because of that, he would take on projects that other people couldn't quite get a vision for. They'd look at it and go, why? Why do you want to do that? But he would have that, the storyteller in him could figure that out. A movie like Ordinary People, which is
a river runs through
and a river runs through it. My God, a river runs through it was, when I saw that movie, I didn't know he made it. I was 14, but I watched it over. Something about it just kept hooking me and it was just something about it. I knew that was his voice in the narration, but I was too young to think about, oh, he put all of this together. But I think that his inclination toward politics and toward environmentalism led him to do a movie like A River Runs Through It. And then, of course, the connection to Barton Springs and all of that, I think a big part of it was he was really towing that line, too, of how can I make the most impact?
Yeah. Where can I make the most impact?
And he seemed steadfast on the way that he would do it was research, become really educated on it, whatever the topic was, and then take that and use that education to tell a story that mattered.
The kid who roamed San Marcos in Austin, ate ice cream sitting on the sidewalk curb, or played pickup baseball on the grass, was a highly complicated man. In the beginning, Robert Redford was underestimated because of his good looks. He became the sex symbol of his era, to the extent women fans were sending him their underwear, freshly laundered, let us hope.
I grew up in a kind of a working class environment in Los Angeles, and I hung out with some, pretty rough bunch. And we would go to the matinee on weekend, and we would make fun of the screen. So there would be a love scene, for example. We go, "Oh, yeah, you tell him, lover," that kind of stuff. So the idea of me being that guy, I just couldn't face that.
He was not always the best of businessmen or dedicated actors either. Perpetually late to every meeting, sometimes just not showing up at all, he drove his colleagues in the industry crazy. He never wanted to do retakes. He felt like he got it right the first time, and anything after that was not natural and spontaneous. Anybody watching his loose and easy manner of movement and delivery in a movie might well agree with him on that. He walked that top of that little 2x4, the fence, where he didn't become melodramatic.
Or flippant.
Yeah.
That's hard to do. Because especially when you go understated the way he would do it, it's really easy to make it almost seem like, maybe he doesn't even care at all. And that's no good. But if it's melodramatic, that's no good either, especially not for film. So finding that little space in between that's a tricky dance, and he walked it pretty well.
Good actors like Redford, they seem to have that ability to project that nuanced emotion and convey so much with so little.
Jason Robards, working on All the President's Men, and he's watching a scene with Redford and Hoffman. He goes, Hoffman, he acts with his whole body, and Redford acts with his fingertips.
That may be the key to Redford's screen presence. He rarely pushed emotion at the audience. He held it back. He let the smallest gesture carry the weight, but that kind of restraint on screen can hide the restlessness underneath. And in Redford's life, that restlessness was everywhere, in the work, in the causes, in the constant motion, and in the private burdens he carried outside the frame.
He was passionate to the point of obsessiveness. Always restless, he was constantly in motion with some project or other. His daughter said that riding horses with her father in the Utah landscape were the best of times. It was then that he slowed down, relaxed, and engaged with his child. The long illness and inability to find a diagnosis for the malady that plagued his son, Jamie, was one of the most difficult issues of Redford's life. That unknown illness took Jamie's life at an early age. Whether it was filmmaking, directing, developing Sundance as a teaching academy, and the film festival that carries the same name, or environmental activism, Redford was totally involved. But those devotions were not what made him famous. He was first and foremost an actor. His movies ranged from romantic comedy to Western antihero to World War I pilot to spy thriller to human drama, and he excelled at all of it.
The idea that he could have, because he was in a position as a star, to just be a star and have a great career and move on. Yeah. But he didn't do that.
No.
He didn't do that. I always think of really good artists in any medium, they always seem to have something to say. And they seem to really not be able to sit still until it gets out.
In his early years, the critic, Pauline Kael, compared him to Lassie, just too good to be real. Other Hollywood directors called him versions of just another pretty boy with a tasseled head of hair and a good tan. But he was a great deal more than that. He walked a fine line in his performing career between the ultimate pretty boy image and the cynical hard edge of the movie business. He never slid over the line too far one way or the other, but maintained a balance between the two positions, where he was not so heavy that he became melodramatic, or too loose and appealing that he ran the risk of being flippant. Whatever our part of the world gave him, he absorbed and used to the fullest advantage. Like Goldilocks, he got it just right.
That balance is what made Redford endure. He had the face of a movie star, but the instincts of an artist who did not want to simply be used by the industry. He wanted to shape it, question it, and eventually build spaces where other artists could do the same. A special thank you to Joleene Maddox Snider for the writing that shaped this episode and for being willing to flip the script this time and guide the conversation from the interviewer's chair. This was a special edition of Lone Star Lore, one where we stepped slightly outside our usual format to ask a broader question. How has Texas influenced artists, storytellers, and cultural figures whose work reached far beyond the state itself? Robert Redford may not be remembered primarily as a Texas figure, but this story reminds us that place leaves traces. Sometimes those traces show up in family history, sometimes in landscape, sometimes in memory, and sometimes in the stories an artist spends a lifetime telling. If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support Lone Star Lore is to follow the show, share it with someone who might enjoy it, and help us keep these stories moving.
From prairie winds to courthouse doors, these tales run deep to the Texas core. With Texas tales, there's always more. So come chase the past with Lone Star Lore.